The rain poured heavily, turning the narrow country road into a slippery mess. Patricia Wallace, a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled hair and an air of importance, sat frustrated in her luxury car. The vehicle had decided to break down in the worst possible place, miles from the nearest town, and without any cell phone service. She tapped her manicured nails on the steering wheel, muttering complaints under her breath. Of all days, she grumbled. Why does this have to happen now? And in this weather? She glanced at the dashboard again, but the engine refused to cooperate. With a sigh, she reached for her umbrella. As she stepped out into the storm, the cold wind whipped at her tailored coat. Water splashed her shoes, and her irritation grew. She looked down the empty road, hoping for a passing car. None came. Minutes passed, and just when Patricia thought she'd be stuck there all night, she heard the rumble of an approaching truck. The headlights cut through the rain, and the vehicle slowed as it neared her. Relief mixed with hesitation as the truck stopped, and a tall man stepped out. His clothes were simple, and his boots splashed through the puddles with confidence. "Need some help, ma'am?" the man asked, his voice steady and calm. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she sized him up. His dark skin glistened from the rain, and his presence made her feel uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. "No, I'm fine," she replied quickly, her tone sharp. The man raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem offended. "Your car looks like it's not going anywhere in this weather. I can take a look if you want." Patricia hesitated. She was stuck, and the rain wasn't letting up. But something about accepting help from a stranger, especially someone she didn't know, felt wrong to her. "I don't think that's necessary," she said, trying to maintain her composure. The man gave her a small smile. "Suit yourself," he said, turning to leave. But just as he reached his truck, a loud clap of thunder echoed through the air. Patricia flinched, her umbrella slipping from her hand. The wind carried it away, leaving her drenched. "Wait," she called out, her voice faltering. "Maybe you can take a quick look." He stopped and turned back, his expression unreadable. "All right, ma'am. Let's see what we've got here." Without another word, the man walked to her car, popped the hood, and began inspecting the engine. Patricia watched him work, her arms crossed tightly against the cold. She wanted to say something, maybe thank him, but her pride wouldn't let her. Instead, she stood silently, her discomfort growing as the rain soaked her. "What's your name?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "Marcus," he replied, not looking up. "Sergeant Marcus Hill, Army mechanic." She blinked at the mention of the military, but she didn't respond. Minutes later, Marcus straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Looks like your battery's dead," he said. "I've got jumper cables in my truck. Shouldn't take long." Patricia nodded stiffly, unsure how to feel. As Marcus walked to his truck, she couldn't help but wonder who he really was, and why he seemed so calm in the face of her obvious discomfort. As Marcus rummaged through his truck for jumper cables, Patricia stood by her car, trying to suppress her growing unease. The rain hadn't let up, and her once pristine coat was now damp and clinging uncomfortably to her. She wasn't used to situations like this, being stranded, dependent on someone else, especially someone she'd just met. Marcus returned with the cables and gave her a reassuring nod. "This'll just take a minute," he said, his voice calm despite the rain pouring down on him. Patricia nodded stiffly, folding her arms tightly across her chest. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply watched as Marcus connected the cables, moving with practiced ease. His steady demeanor made her uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was because she wasn't in control for once, or maybe it was her own preconceived notions whispering in her mind. "You've done this before?" Patricia asked, more out of awkwardness than curiosity. Marcus gave her a small smile as he hooked up the last clamp. "Plenty of times. In the Army, we don't always have the luxury of calling for help, so we learn to fix things ourselves." The mention of the army made her glance at him again, this time with a flicker of interest. "You're a soldier." "Was," Marcus replied, wiping his hands on his pants. "I'm back home now, trying to adjust to civilian life." Patricia didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure how to talk to him. Part of her wanted to make a polite comment, but another part held her back, leaving an uncomfortable silence between them. Marcus started her car, and the engine roared to life. Patricia felt a wave of relief wash over her. "It's working," she said, her voice betraying a hint of gratitude. "Told you it wouldn't take long," Marcus replied, unhooking the cables. "You're good to go now." Patricia hesitated. She knew she should thank him, but instead, she asked, "How much do I owe you?" Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am. Just helping out." That answer caught her off guard. She had expected him to ask for something in return. Money, a favor, anything. But instead, he turned to walk back to his truck without another word. "Wait," Patricia called out, her voice more uncertain this time. "Why did you stop to help me? You don't even know me." Marcus paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "Doesn't matter who you are." His words lingered in the air as he climbed back into his truck. Patricia watched him for a moment, unsure what to make of him. People didn't usually help her without expecting something in return. It unsettled her. As his truck pulled away, Patricia got back into her car and adjusted her mirror. Her reflection stared back at her. But for the first time, she didn't like what she saw. The rain continued to fall, but the storm inside her had just begun. Patricia drove slowly down the slick, rain-soaked road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The windshield wipers worked overtime, but the storm seemed relentless. Despite her relief that her car was running again, she couldn't shake the strange feeling left behind by her encounter with Marcus. His calm demeanor and selfless attitude were so unexpected that they left her questioning things she'd long believed. As she rounded a sharp curve, Patricia's chest began to feel tight. At first, she thought it was just the stress of the situation, but the sensation grew worse. Her breaths became shallow, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. "What's happening to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her vision blurred, and she instinctively pulled her car over to the side of the road. Fumbling with her seatbelt, she tried to calm herself, but the feeling only intensified. She gasped for air, her heart racing as panic set in. Her hand searched her bag for her phone, but it was still dead. Patricia's mind raced, and she suddenly remembered the chocolate bar she had eaten earlier. "Oh no," she murmured. "The nuts." Patricia had a severe allergy to nuts, and now she realized she must be experiencing an anaphylactic reaction. Her hands shook as she searched frantically for her epinephrine auto-injector. The bag seemed impossibly large, and she couldn't find it amidst the chaos. Her breathing grew more labored, and fear gripped her heart. In her panic, she remembered Marcus. He had mentioned being a soldier, someone trained to handle emergencies. But he was gone now, far down the road. Tears welled up in her eyes as she leaned back in her seat, struggling to stay conscious. Then, as if by some miracle, she saw headlights in her rearview mirror. A truck pulled up behind her, and a figure jumped out. Her heart leaped when she realized it was Marcus. He ran to her car, his face filled with concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, opening her door. Patricia could barely speak, her voice faint. "Allergic reaction," she gasped. "EpiPen. Bag." Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed her bag and began searching through it with steady hands. It didn't take him long to find the auto-injector. Kneeling beside her, he calmly explained, "This might sting a little, but it'll help." Patricia nodded weakly, trusting him despite herself. Marcus administered the injection swiftly and with precision. Within moments, Patricia's breathing began to ease, and the color returned to her face. "Stay with me," Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're going to be okay." Patricia's eyes fluttered open, her fear slowly giving way to relief. Marcus pulled out a small radio from his truck and called for medical assistance. He stayed by her side, talking to her calmly, ensuring she didn't slip back into panic. As the sound of an approaching ambulance broke through the storm, Patricia looked at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and shame. For the first time in her life, she realized she owed everything to someone she had judged unfairly. Marcus didn't leave her side. Even as the paramedics arrived, his presence was steady, like a lighthouse in the storm, and Patricia couldn't deny the truth anymore. He had saved her life. The soft hum of the hospital room's equipment filled the quiet air. Patricia lay in the bed, her eyes fluttering open and closed as she drifted between sleep and wakefulness. The pain and fear from earlier had faded, replaced by a dull sense of exhaustion. She could still feel the effects of the epinephrine in her body, and the warm blanket that had been draped over her was a comfort she didn't expect to feel again. Marcus sat quietly by her side, flipping through his phone while she rested. The room was peaceful now, but his presence still made Patricia uneasy. She had been so quick to judge him earlier, assuming he was just another stranger. But the man who had saved her life was not a stranger at all. He was someone whose courage and kindness had already started to change her perspective, though she wasn't yet sure how to handle the shift inside her. A few moments later, a nurse came in to check on her, adjusting the IV in Patricia's arm and making sure she was comfortable. "You're doing much better, Mrs. Wallace," the nurse said with a smile. "Your blood pressure is stable, and the reaction seems to have passed. You'll be fine now." Patricia smiled weakly, grateful for the nurse's care, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus. How had he known what to do? Why had he come back? What made him so calm when everything had seemed so chaotic? "Thank you for saving my life," Patricia whispered, turning toward Marcus, who had noticed her eyes on him. Marcus gave a soft smile, but there was no pride in his expression, only quiet humility. "You don't have to thank me, ma'am. It was the right thing to do." Patricia frowned. She had expected a more typical response, something to confirm her initial thoughts that Marcus was just doing what anyone would do. But there was something different about him, something that made her realize how wrong she had been about people like him. She opened her mouth to say something else, but before she could, a doctor entered the room. He introduced himself and began running through the standard checks. Patricia's mind was still on Marcus, but she tried to focus on what the doctor was saying. "You had a close call," the doctor explained. "That was a severe reaction, but luckily, you got the treatment just in time. You'll need to be monitored for the next couple of hours, but you should be able to go home later today. Just take it easy for a while." "Thank you, doctor," Patricia said, her voice still shaky. She was overwhelmed with gratitude, but the reality of what had just happened was still sinking in. As the doctor left, Marcus stood up to stretch. "I'll let you rest," he said, his voice calm as ever. "Just make sure you follow up with your doctor in a couple of days." Patricia watched him, still unsure of what to say. "Marcus," she started, her voice steady but uncertain. "What was it like? Being in the army, I mean. You seemed so composed." He paused, glancing back at her with a thoughtful expression. "You learn to stay calm in the face of danger. You don't have the luxury of panicking when lives are on the line." His words hit Patricia in a way she didn't expect. He wasn't boasting or bragging. He was simply stating the truth, something that made her realize how much she had underestimated him, and people like him. "I didn't realize," she whispered to herself, her thoughts tumbling into a new understanding of the man who had saved her life. The next few hours felt like a blur to Patricia. The room was quiet now, save for the soft beeping of the machines around her. She had rested more than she realized, but her thoughts were restless, tangled in the events that had unfolded so quickly. She couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, how he had come back for her, saved her life without hesitation, and stayed with her when she had nothing but coldness to offer. She had always been proud of her beliefs. She grew up with a certain idea of how the world worked and the people in it, but Marcus had shattered that idea in an instant. He wasn't like the people she'd known, the people she had grown up around who looked like her and shared similar views. He was different, and yet he was everything she needed at that moment. Her mind drifted to the first time she'd seen him. When he pulled up to her car, she had been skeptical and dismissive. She had assumed the worst, thinking he was just another stranger offering help for something in return. Her pride and her biases had clouded her judgment. And now, as she lay there in the hospital bed, all of that seemed so foolish. A nurse came in to check on her, interrupting Patricia's thoughts. She smiled warmly as she adjusted the IV. "How are we feeling today?" the nurse asked, checking Patricia's vitals. "I'm better," Patricia replied, trying to sound confident. "Thank you. I can't stop thinking about what happened." The nurse gave her a reassuring smile. "That's normal. It was a big scare." Patricia nodded but then felt a tug in her chest, as if there was something more she needed to face. She had been so quick to judge Marcus. Her assumptions had been based on her own limited experiences, not on reality. It was a humbling realization that she had to confront. After the nurse left, Patricia sat up slowly, her thoughts swirling. She knew she had to apologize to Marcus, but she didn't know where to start. The man had saved her life, yet she had been cold and distant. Her pride had kept her from offering him any real thanks. As the door opened, Marcus walked in, his usual calm presence filling the room. He didn't say anything at first, just gave her a small nod. It was as if he knew she was processing everything on her own, giving her space to come to her own conclusions. "Marcus," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant, "I owe you more than just a thank you." He raised an eyebrow, as if surprised by her sincerity. "You don't owe me anything. I was just doing what needed to be done." Patricia shook her head. "That's not true. You didn't have to help me. You could have walked away, but you didn't. And I was rude to you. I judged you without even knowing you." Marcus stayed silent, letting her speak. He seemed patient, as if he had already forgiven her without needing to hear the words. But Patricia needed to say it. "I'd spent so much of my life holding on to certain beliefs," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "And I was wrong. About you. About people like you." Marcus looked at her with understanding, but there was no judgment in his eyes. "We all make mistakes," he said quietly. "What matters is what we do after." Patricia nodded, feeling a weight lift from her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could let go of the walls she had built around herself. Marcus's kindness had started to change her, and she realized that change was something she couldn't ignore any longer. "I'm sorry," she said simply, looking him in the eyes. "And thank you. For everything." Marcus gave her a nod of acknowledgement. "You're welcome, ma'am. Just glad I could help." As he left the room, Patricia felt a small but significant shift within herself. She had begun to see things differently, not just about Marcus, but about the world around her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally learning what it meant to truly understand someone. The days following Patricia's release from the hospital were quiet. The storm had passed, but her mind still swirled with thoughts of Marcus. She couldn't stop thinking about how wrong she had been to judge him so harshly. Every time she tried to focus on something else, his calm face and steady hands filled her thoughts. He had saved her life, not out of obligation, but because it was simply the right thing to do. And that act of kindness had started a ripple effect within her, one she hadn't expected. It had been a week since the incident, and Patricia had made a decision. She knew that she couldn't just let this moment pass without doing something to show Marcus how much his actions had meant to her. She had to find a way to express her gratitude, something beyond just a simple thank you. Patricia spent the next few days thinking of how to approach him. She didn't want to make it seem forced or insincere, but she wanted him to know that he had made a difference. Finally, she had an idea. She called up a local organization that supported veterans and their families, offering to sponsor a small event for them. It wasn't much, but it felt like the right way to honor Marcus and the many others who served. She spent the next several days preparing for the event, arranging for refreshments, finding a venue, and inviting a few close friends. She even printed up flyers that told the story of how Marcus had helped her. It wasn't about making him a hero. It was about sharing the kindness he had shown her with others. The day of the event arrived, and Patricia found herself standing in front of a small crowd at the local community center. She was nervous, but as she looked around the room, she felt a sense of purpose. She knew this was the right thing to do. After a brief introduction, Patricia began to speak. "I'm sure many of you are here today to learn more about the amazing men and women who serve our country," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But there's one man I'd like to focus on today, someone who I owe my life to, Sergeant Marcus Hill." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The room was quiet as Patricia shared the story of how Marcus had saved her during her allergic reaction. She told them how he had stayed by her side, even when it wasn't his responsibility, and how his kindness had changed the way she saw the world. "I had been wrong about people like Marcus," she continued. "I had let my own biases and assumptions guide me, but he showed me what it truly means to help someone, without asking for anything in return." As Patricia finished her speech, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had done what she could to express her gratitude, and in doing so, she hoped she had also shared the lesson she had learned with others. Just as she was about to sit down, Marcus walked into the room. His expression was a mix of surprise and humility. He had no idea what was happening, but he stood quietly at the back, watching Patricia. She smiled at him, her heart full of gratitude. As the event continued, Patricia saw the impact of her words. People approached Marcus, shaking his hand and thanking him for his service. They shared stories and showed him the respect he deserved. But most importantly, Patricia saw how kindness could break through even the hardest walls. It had broken through hers, and now it was helping others see the world in a different light. That day, Patricia realized that her life had changed in ways she never imagined. Marcus's simple act of kindness had set off a chain reaction, and she felt proud to have been a part of it. As the event came to an end, she knew that she would continue to learn, grow, and live with a deeper understanding of others, just as Marcus had shown her. A few weeks had passed since the small event, and Patricia felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. The story of Marcus's kindness had begun to ripple out, reaching people she never thought it would. She received messages from friends and even strangers who had heard about the event, all expressing how moved they were by Marcus's actions. Patricia knew the ripple effect was only just beginning. But as much as she had done by honoring Marcus through her speech, she felt there was still more to be done. She knew that actions often spoke louder than words, and she had to show him just how deeply his kindness had touched her and others. One evening, Patricia made a phone call. She had been thinking about it for days, and now she was ready to take the next step. The call was to a local organization that helped support veterans and active military families. She wanted to organize a bigger event, one that would honor Marcus and others like him, and she needed help to make it happen. The event would be a celebration of veterans, not just a simple gathering, but a true tribute to their service and sacrifice. Patricia wanted to make it clear that Marcus's act of kindness was just one small piece of the larger picture of the brave men and women who put their lives on the line every day. As the days passed, Patricia worked tirelessly to pull everything together. She contacted local businesses to donate food and drinks, invited speakers who had worked with veterans, and arranged for a small band to play. The venue was a large hall, big enough to hold everyone she hoped would attend. It wasn't just about honoring Marcus anymore. It was about honoring all the unsung heroes who worked quietly, without recognition, every day. On the day of the event, the hall was filled with people. There were veterans of all ages, their families, and members of the community who came to show their support. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the quiet hum of conversations as people began to mingle. When Marcus walked into the hall, he was taken aback. He wasn't expecting anything like this. He had thought the small gathering at the community center was a one-time thing. But now, as he looked around at all the faces, he realized that Patricia had organized this to show him, and all the veterans, that they were truly appreciated. Patricia spotted him across the room and walked over to him with a warm smile. "Marcus," she said softly, "I'm so glad you could make it." Marcus smiled back, his eyes full of gratitude and surprise. "I didn't know this was for all of us," he said. "This is amazing." Patricia shrugged modestly. "It's not just for you," she said. "It's for everyone who has ever served. You just helped me see how important it is to show people that we appreciate them." As the evening progressed, Patricia stood at the front of the hall and gave another speech. This time, it was even more personal. She spoke about the lessons she had learned from Marcus, how kindness had the power to change people, how small actions could make a big difference, and how it was never too late to change your views. "Tonight," Patricia said, "we honor those who have served, and we thank them for their courage, their sacrifices, and their strength. We also thank those who help them, whether it's a simple act of kindness or the willingness to stand up when it counts." The crowd applauded, and Marcus, standing in the back, felt a deep sense of pride. He had never sought recognition, but the gesture from Patricia, along with the support of the community, was more than he could have ever expected. He realized that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about showing that acts of kindness and gratitude were worth celebrating. As the event ended, people continued to shake hands and share stories. Patricia and Marcus exchanged a quiet smile, both knowing that the journey they had started together would continue. And for Patricia, this event marked a new chapter in her life, a chapter filled with understanding, compassion, and a commitment to helping others, just as Marcus had helped her. The event had been a success, far beyond what Patricia had imagined. People from all walks of life had come together to celebrate the men and women who served, and to recognize the kindness that could change lives. Patricia couldn't help but smile as she walked through the hall, seeing how much support there was for Marcus and the other veterans. It was a beautiful, humbling experience, one that made her believe in the power of people coming together for something good. As the final guests began to leave, Patricia stood near the exit, shaking hands and thanking everyone who had attended. She felt a deep sense of pride for the event she had organized, but more than that, she felt grateful. Grateful for the chance to change, and for the lessons she had learned from Marcus's actions. Marcus, too, seemed a little overwhelmed by the outpouring of appreciation. He was used to working quietly in the background, never seeking recognition, but now he stood tall, his heart full of gratitude for the people who had shown up that night. They had not just honored his service, but had also come to understand the importance of small acts of kindness. It made everything he had done in his life feel more meaningful. As the last guests left and the lights dimmed, Patricia and Marcus stood by the door, talking quietly. "I didn't expect this much attention," Marcus said, his tone humble. "This was bigger than I imagined." Patricia smiled. "I don't think any of us realize just how much people need to feel appreciated. You've shown me that." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "It's not always about grand gestures or big speeches. Sometimes it's just being there for someone when they need help. That's what really matters." Patricia looked at him, her eyes filled with sincerity. "You taught me that," she said, "and I want to keep learning. I want to continue making a difference, even in small ways. You've helped me see that it doesn't take much to change the way we see each other." As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Marcus gave her a small but genuine smile. "You're already making a difference, Patricia. You've changed, and that's something." Patricia paused, letting his words sink in. She had spent so many years focused on herself, judging others based on her own narrow views. But now, she realized that she had a chance to make the world better, one small step at a time. She could be part of the change, just like Marcus had been for her. "I guess this is just the beginning," she said, looking out at the street lit by the soft glow of the streetlights. "There's a lot more to be done." Marcus agreed. "There always is, but you're on the right path." Patricia, don't stop now." They stood together for a moment, taking in the quiet night. Marcus's words had made an impact, just like his actions had. Patricia knew now that her journey wasn't just about learning to appreciate others, but about continuing to grow, to help, and to never stop challenging the way she saw the world. As they parted ways that night, Patricia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. It wasn't just about what had happened at the event. It was about the lasting change inside her. She would continue to carry Marcus's lesson with her, knowing that small acts of kindness could lead to big changes, and she would keep working, just as Marcus had, to be the kind of person who made the world a better place, one kind act at a time.